Hello everyone and welcome to the first screencast for Chapter 6. Chapter 6 we're going to be talking about the efficiency of markets, talking about consumer surplus and producer surplus and how taxation affects those things. And so this first screencast we're going to talk about consumer surplus. So first, to give you a little background on where consumer and producer surplus fit in to microeconomics. It's a part of microeconomics known as welfare economics. Welfare economics is the study of how the allocation of resources affects people's well-being. All right. Up until this point, we've really just been talking about how those resources get allocated. Now we're going to start thinking about how that allocation affects people's actual well-being. All right. So recall that we've said over and over and during some of our in-class experiments that markets create value, right? So economic welfare is composed of two measures of that market value, consumer surplus and producer surplus, all right? So consumer surplus is based on the difference between how much the consumer would have been willing to pay and how much did they actually pay, all right? So I've said it many times. If I go over to Ike's Lovin' Sandwiches downtown here and I buy a sandwich, then the sandwich must have been worth more than the money I gave Ike, or I would not have, or whoever's working at Ike's, the money I gave the cashier. Otherwise, I would not have given them the money. So the sandwich must be worth more to me than what I paid for it. All right. That difference is the consumer surplus. All right. So here is an example from the book. Here's the willingness to pay for new economics textbooks. All right. And so Beanie has a willingness to pay of $200, Mitch has a willingness to pay of $150, and Frank only has a willingness to pay of $100. All right. So the willingness to pay is if the price is below that willingness, you will buy the book. All right. If the price is above your willingness, you won't buy the book. So if the actual price of the textbook were $151, who will actually buy the book? Well, only Beanie, right? Because for Mitch, the book is $1 more than his willingness to pay, so he wouldn't buy it. For Frank, it's like $51 more than his willingness to pay, so he's not going to buy it. So really, only Beanie here is going to buy the textbook. All right. So consumer surplus is the difference between your willingness to pay and the price actually paid to get that good. So at a price of $151, all right, only Beanie buys the book, but he gets $49 worth of consumer surplus. Notice, $151 is $49 less than $200. So that $49 that he would have been willing to pay is his consumer surplus. Mitch and Frank don't buy the book, all right? Because if they did, they would be getting negative consumer surplus. People don't do that in our models, all right? People don't buy things for more than they're actually worth to them, all right? If you remember in the experiment we played in class with the oranges, you were assigned a particular value for the oranges, and you were supposed to buy for less than that value. If you paid more than the orange was worth, that was a bad deal for you. This is the same concept, but now we're giving it a name, consumer surplus, all right? So here's what consumer surplus looks like in a simple graph for just these three guys, all right? So here we're going to have Beanie's willingness to pay is $200, Mitch's willingness to pay is $150, and Frank's willingness to pay is $100, all right? So that's their willingness to pay. And based on that willingness to pay, we can find their consumer surplus at different prices, okay? So what if the book is $175 per book? All right, let's put everybody back in here. Well, at $175, only Beanie is going to buy because remember, Beanie's willingness to pay was $200. $175 is above everyone else's willingness to pay, so they're not going to buy the book and they won't get any consumer surplus. All right, Beanie will buy the book and he gets $25 of consumer surplus because the book cost $25 less than he would have been willing to pay. All right. So what about at $125 per book? Well, now Beanie gets a whole lot more consumer surplus. Remember, his willingness to pay is $200. If the book is only $125, then he gets a consumer surplus of $75. $75 he would have been willing to pay that he doesn't have to pay because the market sets the price and the price is below his willingness to pay. Also, Mitch will now buy because Mitch's willingness to pay was $150. All right, so now Mitch will buy the book and he gets a consumer surplus of $25. So in total, the consumer surplus here is $100. Beanie gets $75 and Mitch gets $25. All right.